Auto MUNDIAL is sponsored by Trade Centre.
Welcome to Auto MUNDIAL, the weekly car news and review show.
This time we're heading to the London Classic Car Show, checking out some of the capital's greatest old cars.
Plus, we'll be celebrating the big birthdays of both the Chevrolet, Corvette and the Porsche 911. Up first though, the news.
Porsche has reported record profits and sales for 2022. Despite many people around the world feeling the pinch, the current economic situation doesn't seem to have bothered Porsche customers, with the German brand achieving profits of 6.8 billion euros last year. The Cayenne was the top seller, followed by the 911 and the Panamera.
Welcome to a sunny Kensington Olympia for the 9th annual London Classic Car Show. Hosted in the heart of the capital, it's the biggest indoor car show in the city, featuring everything from talks and discussions on stage to a live auction. Of course, the main attraction though was the fantastic selection of cars on display. This year's event also showcased several classics celebrating milestone anniversaries, including this, the Mini Cooper S. Following the launch of the original Mini in 1959, Formula One engineer John Cooper soon realised the car had fantastic potential in motorsport thanks to its low weight and small footprint. Cooper set to work modifying it, and in 1961 the racy Mini Cooper was born. 2 years later, the even sportier Cooper S was released, and it became the car of choice for race and rally drivers the world over. This 1966 model is an original works rally car and competed successfully in period throughout Europe. The combination of red bodywork and a white roof became synonymous with sporty minis, made famous by driver Paddy Hopkirk at the Monte Carlo Rally, which the Mini won 3 times in the 1960s.
Not all Mini Coopers were destined for motorsports though. These 3 Minis were all owned by members of the most famous band in the world, the Beatles. The most British of cars, the uber chic and fun Mini Cooper S was the perfect choice for the band. Believed to be the first time these 3 cars have been together since rehearsals for the White Album in 1968, each of these cars is bespoke to its owner. All members of the Fab Four had one, and each was modified by Radford & Co. Sadly, John Lennon's car has been lost, but the remaining 3 all feature some incredible details. For example, Ringo Starr's car here was custom built with a hatchback, something very rare at the time, so he could get his drums in more easily. Paul McCartney's car, meanwhile, has an opulent leather and walnut interior and Aston Martin-style lights. It was George Harrison's car, though, that really caught the crowd's attention. Covered in hand-painted Tantra artwork, it's about as evocative of the 1960s as a car can possibly be. With gold-painted brightwork, a full-length sunroof and unique bonnet-mounted fog lights, this is one of the most famous and recognisable Minis in the world.
But not all cars at Olympia were polished and pampered showstoppers. Another feature of the event was the display of barn finds, cars that had been sat and forgotten about and are now in need of restoration. With everything from Opel GTs to this fabulous BMW 3-litre CSL. It may have seen better days, but with the values of nice examples now well into six figures, it's well worth saving. Perhaps the most intriguing barn find on display though was this prototype Series 1 Jaguar XJ from 1968. Fitted with a manual gearbox, this is the only V12 XJ ever fitted with 3 pedals. Various parts of the interior had been modified to fit data recorders and measuring equipment, another nod to its experimental past. It's thought to have been used as a development mule for the V12 powered Series 3 E-Type and hasn't been on the road since 1981. Nevertheless, this is a piece of Jaguar history that we hope is preserved.
Another car being celebrated was the iconic Chevrolet Corvette. Celebrating 70 years since the original was launched in 1953, examples of every generation of the all-American sports car were on display, from original C1s right up to the latest generation C8. For decades, the Corvette was never officially available in the UK, but now the latest mid-engined version is, and in right-hand drive. In the early 1950s though, the UK market was the last thing on Chevrolet's mind, as General Motors faced disaster with shrinking sales and increased competition. Brand manager Thomas Keating realised change was needed, so gave the green light for a type of car Chevy had never built before, a sports car. Named after the fast and manoeuvrable class of American naval vessels, the Corvette made its debut at the Motorama in New York in 1953. At the time, Keating reckoned the car was still a year away from being production ready, but such was the demand that the Corvette was in production in less than 6 months. However, when the car went on sale, Chevrolet struggled to sell any. Its straight-six engine wasn't refined enough to make the Corvette a good GT, while the automatic gearbox meant it wasn't any good as a sports car either. By 1955, the Corvette had a V8 and a manual gearbox, but it still struggled to compete against European competition. The C1's fiberglass bodywork evolved throughout the 50s and early 60s until 1963, when the Corvette really grabbed America's attention with this, the Stingray. Available as a convertible or a coupe, the Stingray was a monumental step forward for the Corvette name. It got independent rear suspension, a 360 horsepower V8 and a choice of manual or automatic gearbox. The highlight though was the styling. To this day, the C2 is considered by many to be one of the best looking cars ever made. In 1965, disc brakes were added, as was the option for a bigger 6.5 litre motor, pumping out a whopping 425 bhp. The most powerful version was the ultra-rare L88 model. With its 7-litre V8, it's said to have produced something in the region of 560 horsepower, a seriously impressive figure by today's standards. Never mind the mid-1960s.
In 1968, Chevrolet launched the third-generation C3 Corvette. Its underpinnings were largely carried over from the C2, but its shark-inspired bodywork now featured removable roof panels. The most powerful version produced 425 horsepower, but in 1973, America and the world found itself in the middle of an oil crisis. Suddenly, gas-guzzling V8s became less popular, leading Chevrolet to detune its V8 Corvettes down to as little as 165 bhp. The C3 continued on into the 80s with various facelifts along the way. However, with the Vette now facing more competition than ever from Japan as well as Europe, in 1984, the new C4 had a serious task on its hands. With just over 200 horsepower on tap, it didn't quite have the muscle of its 60s counterpart, but 0 to 60 miles per hour in 6.7 seconds was respectable. The revered ZR1 model came along in 1990 with a 5.7-litre V8 producing 375 brake horsepower with a 6-speed manual box. Its 0 to 60 time dropped dramatically to 4.5 seconds onto a top speed of 175. The curvier C5 arrived in 1997, followed by the C6 in 2004. Revealed at that year's Detroit Auto Show, the C6 was the first Corvette since the C1 to have uncovered headlights, with legislature outlawing pop-ups during the C5's production. It was more compact too, but packed a bigger punch with its 6-litre LS2 producing 400 horsepower. Finally, it seemed like the Corvette was a true American sports car, good enough to take on the Porsche 911.
"2014 saw the release of the C7, more angular than before but still unmistakably a Corvette. The C7 represented the return of the Stingray name. While we didn't know it at the time, the 7th generation Corvette would go on to be a landmark car, the last front-engined Corvette. The ultimate C7 was this, the outrageous ZR1. Released in 2019 as the final iteration of the C7, the ZR1 was and is to this day the most powerful Vette of them all, with 755 brake horsepower from its supercharged V8. In 2020, the C8 Corvette was revealed, and it caused quite the stir. For the first time in a production Corvette, the engine was in the middle. Chevrolet had experimented with mid-engined concept cars for decades, but now the Corvette really was a cut-price supercar. Better yet, it's on sale in the UK, with the steering wheel on the correct side for £87,000. The new Corvette E-Ray is the first ever hybrid version, while the Z06 has made a return with a focus on track driving. While a lot appears to have changed in 70 years, many things have stayed the same. The Vette's bodywork is still made from composites, and it's all still thoroughly American. In 2023, the current C8 is the most convincing alternative to European sports cars yet.
Join us again after the break for more from the London Classic Car Show. Auto Mundial is sponsored by Trade Centre. Auto Mundial is sponsored by Trade Centre.
Coming up, 60 years of the Porsche 911. But first, more from the London Classic Car Show.
Welcome back to Kensington, Olympia and the 2023 London Classic Car Show, where we've already seen some of the most desirable cars the capital has to offer. However, it wasn't all Astons and Ferraris. Some far more humble cars also took their turn in the spotlight. One such car was this charming Austin Metro. Once a common sight on any British street, early Metros like this are now incredibly rare. In period, these popular little super minis were favoured by everyone from factory workers to royalty, with Princess Diana often spotted razzing her metro around London. It was kept company by a somewhat more muscular 6R4 version, the Group B rally monster looking as wild today as it must have done 40 years ago. And, of course, no posh car show these days would be complete without an unknown company showing off an over-restored electric converted Land Rover Defender. This example was for sale for £95,000 and had an electric range of up to 70 miles. What a bargain. Other star cars included some sensational Alfa Romeos, a jaw-dropping Lamborghini Espada, and even Chitty Chitty Bang Bang made an appearance.
The main event, though, was the auction, which featured classics for all tastes and budgets. This very tidy Morris 1100 sold for £10,000, while this Bond spec DB5, finished in silver birch, sold for more than 600 grand. A pair of Ferrari Dinos were on offer, each selling for six-figure sums. But it was this more humble Alfa Romeo Giulietta Sprint that we'd have taken home. Fresh from a Concours-level restoration, it looked like the perfect companion for the Mille Miglia event or the next Goodwood revival.
We've already looked at the Mini Cooper S and the Chevrolet Corvette in part 1, each celebrating a milestone birthday. But the biggest celebrations were reserved for a true motoring icon. In 1963, the world was introduced to the Porsche 911 for the very first time. A replacement for the aging 356, the 911 was launched at the Frankfurt Motor Show, continuing Porsche's habit of putting the engine in the back. That didn't seem to put anyone off though, with the original 911 selling well for years, with regular minor updates keeping it competitive. It wasn't until 1975 though that the Carrera began to challenge fully fledged supercars with the introduction of this, the 911 Turbo. For many, this is still considered the definitive 911, with its wider arches, deep dish Fuchs alloys and the iconic whale tail rear spoiler. The Turbo's 3-litre flat 6 produced 260 brake horsepower, rising to about 300 by the mid-80s, propelling the car from 0 to 62 in 5.4 seconds. In 1989, the 911 got its first major update, with the introduction of the 964. 85% of the parts were new, but the basic recipe remained the same. There were now 3 body styles to choose from: coupe, targa or cabriolet, and all-wheel drive was now offered on the new Carrera 4. The biggest change though was the new engine. It was still an air-cooled flat 6, but featured electronic fuel injection and a larger capacity, resulting in 247 bhp in standard trim. A turbo model was also offered, staying true to the original with wider bodywork and a big rear spoiler. The final air-cooled 911 was released in 1994 as the 993. New from the ground up, the 993 carried over only a few parts from the 964, but it was still unmistakably a 911. In turbo form, the 993 produced more than 400 horsepower, getting it from 0 to 62 in 4.5 seconds, onto a top speed of 180 miles per hour.
Perhaps the biggest alteration from the original 911 format came in 1998 with the introduction of the 996. Not only was it the first model to move away from the classic circular headlights, but it also introduced liquid cooling to the 911 for the first time. A result of increasingly strict emissions and noise regulations, the 996 caused a bit of a stir among the purists, especially as it shared various parts with the new, cheaper, mid-engined Boxster. In 1999 though, Porsche released a version that would go on to change the course of the 911 forever. The GT3 was a lighter, harder 996, with an emphasis on track days and unfiltered driving pleasure. It wasn't the first lightened 911, but the GT3 proved so popular that it's been a mainstay in the lineup ever since. The 997 came in 2004, spawning the GT2, which became the first 911 to break the 200 miles per hour mark. 2011 saw the introduction of the 7th generation 991. It was a bit bigger than previous models, but offered improved weight distribution despite remaining very much rear-engined. With a major facelift in 2015, turbocharging was introduced across the range, sparing only the GT3. The current 992 generations arrived in 2019 and now offers the most diverse selection of different models in the car's history, with everything from the hardcore GT3 RS to the off-road ready Dakar. The 911 has proved that rear-engined cars still have their place. Since 1963, more than 1 million 911s have rolled off the production line in Stuttgart, with each new model a clear evolution of the original formula. Despite having its engine in the wrong place, it is still the benchmark sports car that all others are measured against.
Join us again next week on Auto Mundial as we take a look at an electric off-road concept car from Volkswagen. Auto Mundial is sponsored by Trade Centre.